it's important to remember too that there are people that we should respect and remember. So thank you. I really appreciate it. On a much lighter note, does anyone have any fond memories, or not fond if you wish, about your life at UF and kind of what everyday motion of the ocean was? Oh, everyone really described that they were top of their class, very high academic people. So were you all just like TAing everything, becoming prom king and queens?
I never said I was top of my class. Now that's I said I was an overachiever, but you after a while you get through that chemistry degree. I was double majoring, and there was a reason it switched to a chemistry minor instead of a major. Once I got all the way to differential equations and physical chemistry and the chemistry engineering type classes, I said, this is enough for me. I had to do the same physical chemistry class twice and finally took a W. It was just like, I'm done. We'll take the minor. I won't do these last two classes for the major, but I'm over it. I would say some of the fun things for me was I'd never been to a gay club or a drag show or anything like that. And I remember going to a show at University Club and Pearl was there. And for the first time I was in this room, and it was a little bit terrifying and exciting at the same time, like, oh my goodness, there's all these other gay people around me. It's exciting, but I'm terrified. And I want to make sure that I don't see anybody that I know so that they don't take a photo. And then the next day, because in my mind, I'm thinking that I'm somehow going to run for president and all of these scandalous stories of me being gay will come out one day. And, clearly that's not the case. I'm not running for office. And but that's how a mind of a deeply closeted person thinks of everybody's watching you and you're always on display for one reason or another. But I love that show. I really did also enjoy the movie nights that the Rights Union would do. And then I think, Brian, you were on Accent, weren't you? And then there were different speakers who would come that they would bring to campus. So I would say that the social experiences of University of Florida were really helpful, and living in the residence halls for the first year, freshman year, really helped build a lot of the friendships that I had the rest of my time there.
Did anyone else live in the residence hall and have any experiences with that? Doctor, you said you were in Rawlings.
Right. Yeah. No, we were just so naive, I think, back then, and really knew so little socially. And in fact, for women at Florida, it was kind of pretty awful. I mean, we had to wear skirts and dresses until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and we weren't allowed to wear jeans at all. So we were, it was a pretty restricted life for women. And in the 60s, women had only been on campus for about 10 or 12 years. So it wasn't necessarily the best experience in many ways. And yet in other ways, it was transformative for me.
Yeah, men are the worst. I'm sorry, Dr. Ronnie. It is. We should not have required that.
Yes.
Well, but I have to say that I'm grateful for every second that I was there and everything I experienced, because it really did prepare me for a working life in higher education. So, had I not had that, my life would be very different. I'm very grateful for every moment I had at Florida.
And hopefully you've seen upper education transform since you started.
Right. I invented lavender graduation in 1995, and I know Florida's been doing it for a number of years. I actually have been there as a keynote speaker. So, that really thrills me almost more than anything.
Yeah, I remember
Thank
my
you.
lavender graduation. That had a huge impact on me. You guys still can't hear me, can you?
Yes,
We can
Yes,
hear
you can. Okay, good. That's so cool, Dr. Samlo.
thank you.
I was just going to share, I'm getting a lot out of every time you two speak, Dr. Samlo and Kim, because it was, you know, before our time and things were pretty different. So I'll just share, I was a few years before Franz, and for me, I guess what stood out about that time period was like I graduated in 04 and YouTube was created in 05. So for perspective, the internet, you couldn't like find gay people on the internet. You had to find them in real life.
Right.
And that was a bit cloistering because I kind of would just have to run into people and then figure out if they were gay or not, and then proceed to try and build friendships that way. And so I would say that life for me at UF in the 4 years I was there was complicated, and I felt cut off from the gay community that I later discovered after I graduated, partly because I was trapped on campus. I was in the dorms, you know, parking is awful. So you never move your car, right? You're just biking everywhere. And I was too young to go to the UC for some time. Yeah, so it felt like just sort of watching people and whispering to my friends, like, are they family or not? You know, that's kind of what it was like for me.
Maria Gordon identified with you, saying that he met Brian walking each other and looking around, looking for the other gays. Kim, you were saying something?
Well, no, first of all, Dr. Sandler, the stories that you're telling and the reference to the Johns Committee, I really appreciate that. That's just, it's such an awful story. And I just think we need to continue to mention it and continue to bring it up. And, I wonder if it's like part of some sort of history class or some class at the University of Florida. If it's part of something, and if it's not, I think it should be. When I was in school there, I lived a double life after I came out. Like I said, I came out working at Disney. So I had all these friends from Orlando. So I would leave campus on a Friday and go home, or go to Orlando and spend the time with my friends in Orlando. And that was my gay life. It was in Orlando. It was not anything to do with Gainesville or the campus. And like I said, I lived in the fraternity house. It's a small fraternity house, a very conservative, redneck fraternity house. But I said I had an interesting story surrounding Fort Lauderdale spring break. Yes, back in those days, we still went to Fort Lauderdale spring break. And I had a good friend. It was my friend from the BCM who decided to rush fraternity. He was from Miami. His parents had a yacht. So we took the yacht and we stayed in Fort Lauderdale. He invited 3 of our fraternity brothers. So there were a total of 5 of us. No, I'm sorry. There were a total of 5 of us on that yacht for spring break. I went to law school after University of Florida. I went to law school in New York, and then I lived in New York for a while, and ended up coming back and living in Tampa, which is where I live now. And not too long after I got back, I was visiting out at a bar, and I ran into this guy. I saw him like across the bar, and I'm like, that is my fraternity brother that I spent spring break with. I could not believe he was actually gay. I was like, he must be in the wrong bar or something. But it turns out he was, as was another one of the guys that I was with. I came out in Orlando, going to the Orlando bars. It turns out, however, the second gay bar that I went to actually was in Gainesville. One of my best friends in my fraternity, his girlfriend, came up with the idea of going to the gay bar to dance. And that was my second experience in a gay bar. So I knew that they existed. I never, other than that experience, I never got up the courage to actually visit the gay bar in Gainesville. I always tried to like keep those things separate. So it was, it was definitely not a and we knew about the LGBT organization, UFLAG, I think it was called. But I recall fraternity brothers talking about how some fraternities had members in it. It was very much something that you did not bring up when I was in college. So it was kind of double life that I was leaving. There were a couple people that knew, but almost nobody.
Did you enjoy your one night out dancing at UC?
I was so nervous. I really was so
No is
nervous.
an okay answer.
I think we danced very little. I was so nervous. And I don't know if it was the place, but it seemed like every guy that walked by stepped on my toes. And I literally thought that was some sort of signal that they were trying to hit on me by stepping on my toes. I don't know if it was actually true or not, but yes, I was very nervous there.
I think you were reading into it. I think they would be more direct than that, dare I say.
Not necessarily back then. There was a lot more looking and things back then because like Maria was saying, with YouTube coming out, I remember when Facebook came, because I got to UF in 2003, and I remember when Facebook first came to campus, and that was a big deal, and everybody was looking to see kind of if they could figure out who was gay or not based upon the photos that they posted. And then also like MySpace was kind of phasing out, but I'm really dating myself with technology with this. MySpace was out back then, and then LiveJournal. And so we would know people who were like the secret gay club. We would have these live journals and, pass it around. And there was some people on campus who would try to write about their escapades with people who were either on the football team or in this organization or that organization. So it was almost like a backstory Gossip Girl in the background at that time. And a lot of times meeting people there were a lot of looks, there were a lot of just eye contact, because we didn't have Tinder, we didn't have Bumble, we didn't have all the other apps that were out there. So there was a lot of this awkwardness of trying to coordinate with, are they flirting with me? Are they not flirting with me? I don't know if this person's gay, but they're looking at me kind of a way. And if I look away, am I going to make them be offended? So it was a little bit more awkward, and something that I think we take for granted now with so many digital forms of interaction, to be able to quickly get someone on a screen and send them a message very quickly.
Yeah, I can't imagine how inefficient dating is back then. Hats off to y'all. It's I don't know, it's so inefficient now personally for me that I somewhat don't feel bad, because it has not gotten better for some of us, but I hope it was better for y'all.
Well, I mean, what I can say is when we went out to the bars or clubs, people interacted because they didn't have their phones. They didn't have social media to be interacting on. So it was much easier to engage in conversation with somebody at the bar, dance with somebody on the dance floor. It was definitely easier to engage with people in the bar club environment at that point. Of course, when I was in school, actually, when I turned 18, the legal drinking age in Florida was 18. And later that year, the law went into effect, raising it to 19. So I was legal for about 2 months, and then I couldn't drink anymore. But they raised it then to 21. But when they raised it to 21, anybody who was 19 was already grandfathered in. So, I'm sure to a certain extent, it was a different experience for me at that point, because I was of legal drinking age, can go out to the bars. So it was a lot different.
We've kind of already touched on, no, sorry, you go.
No, I'm noting that we don't have anybody on the panel from the 90s. I don't know if there's anybody participating from that area. I'm just wondering, I would be curious to know what the AIDS era effect was on the gay community at University of Florida. I mean, by that time I was living in New York, and I know that I was working in a law firm, and I know that it totally so many people that were in the closet up until that point were sort of forced out of the closet because of their AIDS conditions. And it brought up a whole new conversation about the gay community. And suddenly people that had friends that they didn't know were gay for so long suddenly realized they were, and it kind of changed the whole conversation. And I would be curious to know maybe what the impact was on the college community at that point.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on this?
No thoughts. We reached out to the 90s crew. But I do think, to your point, Kim, that's a great panel discussion for a future date, because I think that topic alone could fill a full hour.
William?
Hey, I was at the University of Florida in the very late 90s. That was definitely a huge conversation. I was coming from Miami, where I grew up. In high school, I was secretly volunteering at the HIV Gay Men's Health Crisis Alliance under the guise of an internship at an art gallery. And that was a really important conversation. It was really scary to move to the University of Florida, to go to college and to become sexually active. I was early adopter to internet. And so I was dating really aggressively when I moved to college. But it was front and center, like the conversations around protection and safe sex, and sort of like getting really scared every time. Like we were able to sort of press through the threshold of like having the internet. It was early, but that was like, there was consequences to that. So it was a really big part of like my time at UF.
Do you think those conversations have dramatically changed since that period in the 90s, when it was so condom centric, I guess you could say, and like safe sex? Is that like a focus anymore? I guess this could be a question for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends if you're taking Truvada or any of these kind of prophylactics or not. I think that really changed the conversation on college campuses.
Yeah, I can attest to that personally. Truvada is kind of like the king of the way, and like people are really taking PrEP. It's almost ubiquitous now, which is really amazing from like a public health standpoint from the college population. But definitely with, I think, outside the college population, PrEP usage is much lower than, and my dad's a family physician and he just learned about PrEP like last year. So like, I think the problem is also like getting PrEP to the people requires physicians that can properly care for queer people, which they are not trained to do oftentimes.
Yeah, HIV dominated kind of conversations. I wanted to go to college out of state, and my parents wouldn't let me go to New York because they were afraid I would get AIDS. So it was absolutely informed my education in the late 90s.
Was that experience for a lot of your peers as well, that
It was
their
really
like life
scary,
outcomes were almost decided by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were all pressing the envelope. I mean, I was early to University Club. I was really thankful that they had a straight night that we could sort of go and be there and explore. I also was coming from a kind of punk rock aesthetic and was sneaking off to raves because nobody I knew would possibly go to an electronic music event. And those spaces were more gender fluid and there was a lot more experimentation. And so I found different places to kind of explore my sexuality in Gainesville when I was living there. And that was really interesting. Like it was for me, Gainesville was a really safe place to kind of experiment and figure things out. Ellen DeGeneres had just come out. It felt like there was an entirely new world. I took a queer theory elective with Kim Emery. I felt like I was like being given access to language around the word queer and learning about history. So, I mean, university felt like a really accepting place, but it felt like it was just happening. And in many ways, the internet was just sort of kind of unfurling. People didn't even really have photographs, but we were talking to each other. And so it was kind of proto bathroom cruising, but you were at home.
That is interesting. we have created a whole can of new worms for ourselves in terms of the internet history. You mentioned, please.
Sorry, before we leave this topic, I wanted to share a story, and I wish this person was here so they could share it themselves. So I was at UF basically the same time that William was. I also took a queer theory course with Kim Emery in 2001, so maybe we were in the same class. But the story I wanted to share, so after I came out, I found the Presbyterian Student Center, which I was not Presbyterian, but for some reason there was a confluence of closeted gay people at the Presbyterian Student Center affiliated with the University of Florida. And I discovered that the pastor there, David, was gay, and he had a long-term partner, and he was also HIV positive and also a Presbyterian minister. And this is, number one, the first time I had ever met like an adult gay person other than Dr. Emery and Dr. Broad. And also the first time I'd ever met anyone who was HIV positive. And he was a Presbyterian minister. So he had this confluence of closetedness that was, it was very thought-provoking for me at the time, because it hadn't occurred to me that being queer, you're already in the closet to some extent. Then you're a minister, you're definitely in the closet from your flock. And then you're HIV positive, which you are trying to hide from everyone, because there was clearly still a lot of social stigma around that. It took me, I knew him for probably 4 years before he shared that with me. So anyway, I just wanted to share that there were definitely, you know, I'm sure if he was here, he would have a lot to say about what it was like in the HIV era, in the AIDS era, or at the University of Florida, because he was there.
Thank you, Maria. That is fascinating, especially with the conversations of religion in all of our lives. That's somewhat inspiring to hear that we had representation in like the clergy, I guess.
Yeah, it was incredibly shocking for me. It just like blew my Catholic brain apart that there was actually a minister who had all of these, you know, intersectional identities at that time.
If I can ask one last question, because we are hitting 8:02, but I do want to ask a question if I can. Something that William very nicely brought up is you went to raves for their openness on gender fluidity. Something that I think our society is really still struggling with is accepting our members of our society that are of trans experience. And I was hoping if any of y'all could share stories of friends or family that you have that were trans and how those experiences kind of like unfolded at UF. I have a family member that recently came out as trans, and I come from a lot of clergy member in my family, and all of them are like, they, them, I don't know these pronouns, like it's too hard for me, like I can't do this. So I think it's good to kind of like have these open conversations about trans people, because we need to become more accepting of them, both in queer circles and more wider. If anyone has
Sure.
any.
So before I went to UF, I really was not very aware of the trans dynamic and didn't have a lot of experience with it. And actually one of the people who, she was one of the performers at UC Club when I was there, Ivana Black, I think was her name. I don't know if anybody else who was there from like the late 90s, early mid 2000s remember her. And she actually ran for Senate seat and all of that. So, and then there was another individual, but she was probably a few years behind me. And so those were my first two experiences with people who were trans and learning about pronouns back then, because even in 2004 or 5, we weren't discussing the use of pronouns. It was just, they introduce themselves as this person, and then they would just gently correct you if they wanted to be they or he or she, and you just went with it. And as far as family members go, my cousin actually came out as trans probably about 3 years ago. He is female to male. And it was interesting because I kind of when he was still identifying as a woman, as a lesbian, I kind of let her take the flack from the family. It's so horrible to say this, but at the time he was very vocal about being a lesbian at the time, and it drew the attention away from me at family dinners. And like, I didn't have to say anything. And then after I came out of the closet, then he decided to announce that he was trans, and he's married and they have a kid and everything now. But he still gives me some slack about how he would take the flack at the dinner table during those discussions for many years for being the person that was the LGBT spectrum.
Yes, trans people often do get more flack than other queer people, which is interesting that like some forms of us are like less okay than others, I think. Dr. Sandlow, did you have, or Maria, sorry.
I was just going to mention that I sort of watched, I think in real time, trans identities become more acceptable, because essentially when I was kind of the height of my gay identity was probably the mid 2000s after I left college. And I watched probably about half of the group of friends that I had realize that they were trans, FTM, and go from being essentially butch lesbians and transitioning to be men. And I feel like that was not because that's not who they were all along. It's because it became acceptable.
Dr. Ronnie, it looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
So at Florida, you know, in the 60s, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anybody who was gay, you know, much less trans. So that just simply never crossed my mind at all. And it really didn't until I got my first job in higher ed at the University of Michigan in 1994. And then I learned a great deal very quickly. And I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I became as supportive as I am, because my 9-year-old granddaughter 3 years ago announced that she was transgender, and that, you know, she was born male. At the age of 9, said, you know, that she's a girl, which surprised nobody. And now at the age of 12, you know, she's going through puberty now, and she's so supported and so loved by her family. Even my mother, who's 96 years old, gave this kid money to put away for when she's ready to have surgery. So, you know, in my personal life, dealing with transgender people has been nothing short of unbelievably supportive. But God knows, I mean, with my students, I have seen so many horrible experiences. And there have been wonderful experiences too. You know, on campus at University of Michigan, it was terrible. We got to UCLA and it was wonderful. One of my students there became the first executive director of the Transgender Law Center. And so it's been a journey. It continues to be a journey, for not just for myself, for my family, but, you know, for everybody. And it's our responsibility as lesbians and gay men and bisexual people to stand up, speak out for our transgender sisters and brothers, as well as for people of color and other minority communities, because they're coming after all of us, and we're all in this together. So I hope that, you know, we've all sort of virtually joined hands as we move forward, so that we are supporting our sisters and brothers, no matter what body they're wearing or what identity they use, that we're all here for one another.
I think that's exactly where we should end off. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you all for spending time with us tonight. I know everyone has really busy, hectic lives, but this made my week so much better. So just thank you all. Down the pipeline, I and Gordon are really trying to put together some type of in the library, like book, paper and pen of experiences of graduates from University of Florida over the years. So if anyone would be interested in that, that's just kind of like a goal of mine in the next few years, that especially before all of us pass away, like we all have a special contribution to society. We all have like a special experience that we can pass on. And I think it's really important that our experiences of resilience they should be in the history books, because queer history doesn't exist currently. So I do think it should exist one day. I'll send email to everyone afterwards to actually like facilitate that. But yeah, that's in the coming pipeline.
Yeah, I think that USF actually has like a gay history department where they have a lot of stories. I mean, we can't let them beat us.
Well, and actually last year I published a 4-volume set of LGBTQ history. So there is quite a bit of information out there, but I'm telling you, there's so much more that I continue to research and have interns, and we keep looking, and all of our stories, all of your stories are just critical to capture. However you do that, whether you write your memoir or it's in a compilation of something like Harrison is talking about, do it, you must.
Foot and mouth. I need to read your 4 books. Your history does exist.
It's a lot. I have it as every single day. It's called This Day in LGBTQ History. So each day there's like a list of really